The morning sun cast a merciless glare across the barren landscape, as blood seeped into the parched earth of the Nevada territory. Beatrice Lawson's fingers clawed weakly at the dirt, her consciousness fading as she watched the dust cloud of retreating horsemen disappear over the horizon. The taste of copper filled her mouth, and the arrow shaft protruding from her shoulder sent waves of agony through her body each time she attempted to move. The year was 1868, and the westward expansion had brought Beatrice's family to the edges of civilization. Now, at 22, she lay among the scattered remnants of their wagon train, alone and dying, the bodies of her fellow travelers strewn across the trail like discarded dolls. Time ceased to have meaning as the sun crawled across the sky. Beatrice's vision dimmed, the world around her reduced to blurred shapes and distant sounds. The clip-clop of approaching hooves barely registered in her fading consciousness. She couldn't tell if hours or minutes had passed when a shadow fell across her face, blocking the harsh sunlight. "My God!" a deep voice murmured, followed by the sound of boots hitting the ground. Rough hands gently turned her over, and Beatrice found herself staring up at a weathered face framed by a wide-brimmed hat. The man's blue eyes widened with shock as he assessed her wounds. "Still alive," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Miss, can you hear me?" Beatrice tried to respond, but only a weak groan escaped her parched lips. "I'm going to help you," the stranger promised, his voice steady despite the horror surrounding them. "My name is Quinn Everett." "You're safe now." Quinn worked quickly, snapping the shaft of the arrow before carefully lifting Beatrice onto his horse. The pain overwhelmed her, and darkness claimed her consciousness as they rode away from the massacre site. When Beatrice next opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a bed in a small, sparsely furnished cabin. Sunlight streamed through a nearby window, illuminating dancing dust particles in the air. Her body felt heavy, her thoughts foggy from pain and fever. "You're awake," the same deep voice observed. Beatrice turned her head to see the man Quinn seated in a chair beside the bed. He looked tired, his face stubbled with several days' growth of beard. "How long?" she managed to rasp, her throat painfully dry. Quinn rose immediately, bringing a cup of water to her lips. 3 days, he answered, supporting her head as she drank. "The fever broke last night. I wasn't sure you'd make it." As the cool water soothed her parched throat, memories of the attack flooded back. Beatrice's eyes widened with panic. "My family, the others," Quinn's expression told her everything before he spoke. "I'm sorry, miss. There were no other survivors." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes as the reality of her situation crashed over her. Her parents, her younger brother Thomas, all gone. The neighboring families who had joined their wagon train in search of a better life in the West, all dead. She was alone in the world, saved only by the intervention of this stranger. "Where am I?" she asked when she could speak again. "My cabin," Quinn replied, setting the empty cup aside. "About 15 miles outside of Reno. I was tracking a mountain lion that had been taking my livestock when I came across your wagon train." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I buried the dead as best I could." "Thank you," Beatrice whispered, the words wholly inadequate for what he had done. Quinn nodded once, then stood. "You need to rest. That arrow wound was deep and you lost a lot of blood. I managed to get it out clean, but infection's still a risk." As he moved toward the door, Beatrice called out, "Wait, what should I call you?" He turned back, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Quinn's fine, miss." "Beatrice," she offered in return. "Beatrice Lawson." "Rest, Miss Lawson," he said. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." The following days passed in a haze of pain and gradual recovery. Quinn proved to be a capable nurse, changing Beatrice's bandages with gentle hands that belied his rough exterior. He kept her wound clean, applied poultices of herbs he gathered himself, and ensured she drank plenty of water and broth. When Beatrice was strong enough to sit up, Quinn helped prop her against the pillows and brought her a bowl of stew. "You seem to know what you're doing," she observed as he checked her bandages. Quinn's expression clouded momentarily. "Served as a medic during the war. Saw more than my share of arrow wounds and worse." "Union?" Beatrice asked carefully, aware that even 3 years after the conflict's end, loyalties remained a sensitive subject. He nodded. 6th Ohio Cavalry fought at Gettysburg, among other places. His tone made it clear he preferred not to elaborate. Beatrice respected his reticence and changed the subject. "How long have you been out here?" "Since '66. Came west after mustering out. Wanted space and silence after all the noise." Quinn sat back in his chair. "What brought your group this way?" Beatrice stared down at her bowl. "My father was a carpenter. Heard there was work in the boomtowns, good money building saloons and hotels. We started from Cincinnati with 3 other families." "Long journey," Quinn commented. "We were nearly there," Beatrice said, a bitter edge to her voice. "Another day, maybe 2, and we would have reached Reno." Quinn was silent for a moment. "The Paiute have been restless this season. Army's been pushing them from their traditional hunting grounds. Some bands have turned to raiding in desperation." "You sound almost sympathetic to them," Beatrice said, surprised by the lack of hatred in his tone. Quinn's blue eyes met hers steadily. "Understanding isn't the same as condoning. They're suffering on all sides out here." He stood, taking the empty bowl from her hands. "You should rest." As days turned into weeks, Beatrice's strength gradually returned. Quinn fashioned a crude crutch to help her move around the cabin when he was out tending to his small herd of cattle or hunting. She insisted on making herself useful, taking over cooking duties and mending his clothes. One evening, as they sat before the fireplace after dinner, Beatrice broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "I need to think about what comes next," she said quietly. "I can't impose on your kindness indefinitely." Quinn looked up from cleaning his rifle. "You're not imposing. Even so, I need to make my own way." Beatrice twisted her hands in her lap. "Perhaps I could find work in Reno. I can sew and cook, and I've some education. I could teach, perhaps." Quinn set the rifle aside. "Winter's coming. The passes will be snowed in soon. Better to wait until spring before making any decisions." Beatrice studied him, trying to discern his thoughts behind his impassive expression. "And you don't mind my staying?" A faint smile curved his lips. "It's been less quiet with you here, not in a bad way." From Quinn, Beatrice realized this constituted high praise indeed. She returned his smile. "Then I accept your hospitality at least until spring." As autumn painted the surrounding hills in gold and crimson, Quinn taught Beatrice about survival in the harsh Nevada wilderness. He showed her how to identify edible plants, how to read animal tracks, and the basics of using a firearm. "You're a natural," he remarked with surprise after she hit her target 3 times in a row with his old Colt revolver. Beatrice lowered the gun, a small thrill of pride running through her. "My father taught me to shoot a rifle when I was 16. Said a woman heading west ought to know how to protect herself." Her voice caught on the memory, grief still fresh despite the passing weeks. Quinn nodded in understanding. "Smart man, your father. He would have liked you," Beatrice said softly. An unexpected warmth filled Quinn's eyes. "I would have liked to meet him." That evening, as they sat together before the fire, Quinn surprised Beatrice by speaking of his past without prompting. "I had a wife before the war," he said, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "Sarah was her name. We had a little farm in Ohio." Beatrice held her breath, sensing the rarity of this confidence. "I came back changed, too changed." His voice grew distant. "She tried, but I couldn't. Couldn't be the man she married anymore. We agreed it was better if I left." He took a long breath. "Last I heard, she remarried. Has children now." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said quietly. Quinn shrugged. "It was for the best. Some wounds don't heal right. And that's why you came all the way out here, to be alone. Thought it was what I wanted." His eyes shifted to meet hers. "Wasn't so sure anymore these past weeks." The admission hung between them, delicate and significant. Beatrice felt her heart quicken but didn't know how to respond. Instead, she reached across the space between their chairs and briefly touched his hand. The first snow came in early November, blanketing the landscape in white. The cabin, which had seemed confining to Beatrice at first, now felt cozy and secure against the howling wind outside. She and Quinn settled into a comfortable routine, sharing tasks and stories as the days grew shorter. On particularly cold nights, they would sit close to the fire, and Quinn would read aloud from one of the few books he owned, mostly practical texts on agriculture and animal husbandry, but also a worn copy of the Iliad that had somehow survived his wartime service. One such evening, as he read about Hector and Andromach's farewell, Beatrice studied Quinn's profile in the firelight. At 31, he was 9 years her senior, but it was experience rather than years that had carved the lines around his eyes and mouth. In repose, with his guard lowered, there was a gentleness to him that few would suspect. When he finished the passage and closed the book, he caught her watching him. "What is it?" he asked. "I was just thinking how different you are from my first impression," Beatrice admitted. Quinn raised an eyebrow. "And what was that? I thought you were stern and taciturn, a man who preferred his own company to any other." A low chuckle escaped him. "That's not entirely wrong. But there's more," Beatrice pressed. "You're kind and thoughtful. You notice things others might miss." Discomfort flickered across Quinn's face at her praise. "Don't go making me into something I'm not, Beatrice. I'm just a man trying to live quietly." "A man who saved a stranger's life," she reminded him. "Who buried people he didn't know because it was the right thing to do." Quinn stood abruptly. "It's getting late. We should turn in." Beatrice watched him retreat to his corner of the cabin, where he had insisted on sleeping on a pallet while she took the bed. She had clearly touched a nerve, though whether it was her praise or her growing familiarity that bothered him, she couldn't tell. The winter deepened, confining them mostly to the cabin and the immediate surroundings. Quinn still ventured out to tend to his cattle, kept in a sheltered valley nearby, but these trips became shorter as the snow piled higher. Their forced proximity might have bred contempt, but instead, Beatrice found herself increasingly drawn to her reluctant host. She came to recognize the subtle shifts in his expression that signaled his moods, to appreciate his dry humor when it emerged, and to value his straightforward honesty. For his part, Quinn seemed to lower his guard incrementally as the weeks passed. He spoke more freely of his childhood in a small Ohio town, his decision to join the Union Army despite his father's objections, the friends he'd made and lost during the conflict. In turn, Beatrice shared her own stories, her mother's lessons in homemaking, her secret desire to continue her education beyond what was considered proper for young ladies, her dreams of the life they had hoped to build in Nevada before tragedy struck. Christmas arrived with little fanfare but surprising warmth. Quinn returned from checking his traps with a rabbit, which Beatrice stewed with the last of their fresh vegetables. After dinner, he presented her with a small, clumsily wrapped package. "It isn't much," he said gruffly. Inside, Beatrice found a carved wooden pendant on a leather cord, a simple flower with delicate petals. "You made this?" she asked, touched by the unexpected gift. Quinn nodded, looking almost embarrassed. Noticed you looking at wildflowers in that book. Thought you might like a reminder that spring will come again. Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes as she secured the necklace around her throat. It's beautiful, thank you. She hesitated, then retrieved a folded piece of paper from her pocket. I have something for you as well. It's not much either. Quinn opened it to find a charcoal sketch of himself, sitting by the fire reading. Beatrice had used scraps of paper and a charred stick from the fireplace to create it over several evenings when he was absorbed in his book. I didn't know you could draw, he said, studying the image with evident wonder. Just a hobby, Beatrice replied. My mother thought it a suitable pastime for a young lady, unlike my interest in books. Quinn looked up from the drawing, his eyes unexpectedly intense. You have a gift. Their gazes held for a long moment, and Beatrice felt a shift in the air between them. Quinn seemed about to say something more when a howl from outside broke the spell. Wolves, he said, rising quickly. Better check the livestock. January brought a brutal cold snap that tested even Quinn's experience with winter conditions. The cabin's walls creaked with the force of the wind, and despite their constant efforts to keep the fire stoked, a chill permeated the small space. On the third night of the storm, Beatrice woke shivering violently despite her blankets. She sat up, alarmed to see her breath misting in the air. The fire had died down to embers, and Quinn was already up, trying to coax it back to life with the last of their dry kindling. We're almost out of wood, he said grimly when he noticed her awake. I'll have to go out at first light to get more. It's too dangerous, Beatrice protested. The temperature must be well below zero. No choice, Quinn replied. We'll freeze otherwise. As dawn broke, Quinn prepared to venture out, layering every piece of clothing he owned and wrapping a scarf around his face. Stay by what's left of the fire, he instructed Beatrice. I should be back within a few hours. Beatrice watched anxiously as he disappeared into the swirling snow. The hours crawled by, and as the weak winter sun began its early descent, her concern grew to outright fear. Quinn should have returned by now. Unable to bear the waiting any longer, Beatrice bundled herself up and stepped outside. The bitter cold stole her breath, but she forced herself to call out for Quinn, straining to hear any response over the howling wind. When none came, she struggled through the knee-deep snow toward the woodpile she knew lay about 50 yards from the cabin. The exertion was exhausting in the deep snow, and her still healing body protested each step. She had almost reached the woodpile when she spotted a dark shape in the snow. Terror seized her as she recognized Quinn's form, half buried in a drift. He wasn't moving. Quinn. Beatrice screamed, forcing her way through the snow to reach him. He was unconscious, his face alarmingly pale where it wasn't reddened by the cold. With strength born of desperation, Beatrice managed to drag him upright, supporting his weight against her as she struggled back toward the cabin. The journey seemed endless, and more than once, Beatrice feared they would both collapse in the snow. But the thought of Quinn's strong, steady Quinn dying from exposure because he had tried to keep her warm drove her onward. When they finally reached the cabin, Beatrice used the last of her strength to maneuver Quinn inside and close the door against the howling wind. She dragged him as close to the dying embers as possible and frantically began removing his frozen outer layers. "Don't you dare die," she muttered as she worked. "Don't you dare leave me alone." Quinn's skin was ice cold, his lips tinged blue. Beatrice remembered what she had heard about treating freezing, that body heat was the most effective remedy. Without hesitation, she stripped off her own outer clothing and lay beside him, pulling blankets over them both. "Live," she whispered, pressing her warmth against him. "Please, Quinn, live." Hours passed as Beatrice drifted in and out of sleep, constantly checking Quinn's breathing and chafing his hands and feet to restore circulation. Eventually, she felt him stir. "Beatrice?" His voice was weak, confused, relief flooded through her. "I'm here. You collapsed in the snow." Quinn's blue eyes blinked open, struggling to focus. "You came looking for me." "Of course I did," Beatrice replied, tears threatening. "What else would I do?" A faint smile touched his lips before his eyes drifted closed again, this time in exhausted sleep rather than dangerous unconsciousness. The storm finally broke the next day, and Quinn regained enough strength to help Beatrice retrieve the wood he'd managed to cut before collapsing. Though still weak, he insisted on building up the fire himself, while Beatrice prepared a simple meal from their dwindling supplies. As they ate in silence, Beatrice could feel Quinn's gaze on her, thoughtful and intense. "You saved my life," he said finally. Beatrice shrugged, echoing his response from months earlier. "You saved mine first." "Not the same. I found you by chance. You deliberately risked yourself in a blizzard." "What was I supposed to do? Let you die out there?" Beatrice set her bowl aside, suddenly angry. "Is that what you think of me? That I could just sit here and wait, knowing you might be freezing to death?" Quinn seemed taken aback by her vehemence. "No, most people wouldn't have. I'm not most people," Beatrice cut in. "And neither are you. You took in a half-dead stranger and nursed her back to health. You've shared your home, your food, your life with me for months now. Did you think I felt nothing for you in return?" The words hung in the air between them, more revealing than Beatrice had intended. Quinn stared at her, something unreadable in his expression. "What exactly do you feel, Beatrice?" he asked quietly. Beatrice's heart hammered in her chest. She hadn't planned to have this conversation now, perhaps ever, but near death had a way of clarifying one's priorities. "I care for you," she admitted. "More than I should, perhaps. More than might be wise, given the circumstances." Quinn set his own bowl aside and moved to sit beside her on the bench. "And why isn't it wise?" "Because spring will come, and I'll leave for Reno, and you'll be here alone again, just as you wanted before I arrived." Quinn's hand found hers, his touch gentle. "What if that's not what I want anymore?" Beatrice looked up to find his face close to hers, his eyes intent. "What do you want, Quinn?" "I want you to stay," he said simply. "If you want to." Before Beatrice could respond, Quinn leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that started hesitant but quickly deepened as she responded. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "I want to stay," Beatrice whispered against his mouth. The remainder of winter passed in a new harmony as their relationship evolved from friendship to something deeper. Quinn spoke of expanding the cabin in the spring, adding another room and proper windows. Beatrice sketched designs for a vegetable garden and discussed the possibility of raising chickens. They were making plans for a future together, though neither had spoken explicitly of marriage. Beatrice sensed Quinn's reluctance to rush, his fear of pushing too hard after his failed first marriage. She respected his caution and focused on enjoying each day as it came. By the time March arrived with its promise of thawing, Beatrice had fully recovered from her wounds, though she would always carry a jagged scar on her shoulder as a reminder of the attack. Quinn had taught her everything he knew about surviving in the wilderness, and she had brought warmth and purpose back into his solitary existence. One mild afternoon, as they worked together to repair damage to the cabin's roof caused by winter storms, Quinn paused and looked toward the distant hills. "Riders coming," he said, shading his eyes against the sun. "3 of them." Beatrice felt a flutter of anxiety. They rarely had visitors this far out, and her memories of the last time she had encountered strangers on horseback were still raw. Quinn retrieved his rifle from inside the cabin and stood ready as the riders approached. As they drew nearer, Beatrice could see they were white men, two in civilian clothes and one in a cavalry uniform. "Mr. Everett," called the uniformed man as they reined in before the cabin. "Lieutenant James Foster, Fort Churchill." Quinn lowered his rifle slightly but remained wary. "What brings the Army out this way, Lieutenant? Word reached us of a Paiute raid on a wagon train last fall. We've been tracking down information." The lieutenant's eyes shifted to Beatrice. "This would be Miss Lawson, I presume?" Beatrice stepped forward, surprised. "How do you know my name?" "Your description was in a telegraph sent by your uncle in Cincinnati. Robert Lawson has been trying to determine if any of his brother's family survived the journey west." The lieutenant produced an official-looking document. When reports of the raid reached Fort Churchill, he was notified. "Uncle Robert," Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth. "I had no idea he was looking for me. He's offered a substantial reward for information about your whereabouts," the lieutenant continued. "Dead or alive, though he hoped for the latter, of course." Beatrice looked at Quinn, whose expression had become unreadable again. His earlier openness vanished behind a mask of reserve. "What happens now?" she asked the lieutenant. "That depends on you, miss. Your uncle has asked that you be escorted to Reno if found alive. From there, arrangements can be made either for your return to Cincinnati or for him to join you here, as you prefer." The prospect of family of not being entirely alone in the world should have been joyful news. Yet Beatrice felt only a complicated tangle of emotions as she glanced between the lieutenant and Quinn. "When would we leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning would be best. We need to reach Fort Churchill within the week." "I see." Beatrice turned to Quinn, desperately trying to read his thoughts. "May I have some time to gather my belongings?" Lieutenant Foster nodded. "Of course. We'll make camp just down the hill." He tipped his hat and led his men away, giving Beatrice and Quinn privacy. As soon as they were alone, Beatrice rounded on Quinn. "Say something." Quinn ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. "What do you want me to say? Your family is looking for you. You have people who care whether you live or die. That's a blessing." "And what about us? Everything we've talked about, planned for." "That was before," Quinn said quietly. "Before you knew you had options." Anger flared in Beatrice's chest. "So you're just giving up, sending me away without a fight?" Quinn's eyes met hers, pain evident in their blue depths. "I'm not sending you anywhere, but I won't hold you here either, not when you have family waiting." "Uncle Robert is my father's brother. We met perhaps 3 times in my life," Beatrice countered. "He's not the family I want to build my future with." "Beatrice, no, you listen to me, Quinn Everett." She stepped closer, poking a finger at his chest. "I nearly died last fall. You nearly died this winter. Life is too short and too precious to waste on what ifs and maybes. I know what I want, and it's right here." Quinn caught her hand, holding it against his heart. "You should take time to think. Go to Reno. Meet with your uncle's representatives. If you still feel the same way after a few weeks of civilization, then come back to me." Beatrice searched his face. "You're afraid I'll change my mind." "I'm afraid you'll regret not exploring all your options," Quinn corrected gently. "I want you to choose me knowing exactly what you're giving up. And if I choose you tomorrow, without waiting," a small smile touched his lips, "then I'll be the happiest man in Nevada territory." Beatrice considered his words, recognizing the wisdom in them despite her frustration. "Fine. I'll go to Reno. I'll meet with Uncle Robert's people, and then I'll come back and build that vegetable garden." Quinn's smile widened. "I'll be waiting." They spent that evening in quiet conversation, making more concrete plans than they had before. Quinn promised to begin the cabin expansion immediately, so it would be ready when Beatrice returned. She, in turn, made a detailed list of supplies to purchase in Reno: seeds for the garden, material for curtains, perhaps even a few books. I should get you a proper ring while I'm there, Beatrice mused as they lay together in the darkness. Quinn propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. A ring? If I'm coming back to stay, we should make it official, don't you think? Beatrice's heart raced at her own boldness, but she maintained a casual tone. Unless you'd prefer to continue living in sin, Mr. Everett. Quinn laughed softly. Are you proposing to me, Miss Lawson? I believe I am, Beatrice replied, suddenly serious. I love you, Quinn. I want to be your wife. In the dim light of the dying fire, she saw his expression soften. And I love you, Beatrice, more than I thought possible after everything that came before. He kissed her gently. But let's do this properly. When you come back from Reno, I'll have a ring waiting and I'll ask you properly. I'll hold you to that, Beatrice whispered against his lips. Morning came too quickly, and with it, the lieutenant and his men. Quinn helped Beatrice pack her few possessions and walked her to the waiting horses. The lieutenant had brought an extra mount for her, a gentle mare with a smooth gait. As she prepared to mount, Beatrice turned to Quinn one last time. 2 weeks, she promised. 3 at most. Don't forget to feed the chickens we don't have yet. Quinn smiled, though his eyes were sad. Safe travels, Beatrice. The journey to Reno took 3 days, traveling at a pace the lieutenant deemed appropriate for a lady still recovering from injuries. Beatrice found herself grateful for Quinn's insistence on teaching her to ride properly during the milder days of late winter. As they crested the final ridge and the growing town of Reno came into view, Beatrice felt a momentary thrill at the sight of civilization after so many months in isolation. Chimney smoke rose from dozens of buildings, and the sounds of construction and commerce drifted up to meet them. Welcome to Reno, Miss Lawson, Lieutenant Foster said. I'll escort you to the International Hotel. Your uncle's attorney, Mr. Daniels, has taken rooms there to await news of your fate. The International Hotel was the finest establishment in Reno, a 3-story structure with actual glass windows and painted trim. Beatrice felt suddenly conscious of her rough clothing and wind-burned complexion as they entered the lobby. A well-dressed man in his 50s rose immediately from a leather armchair, his eyes widening as they fell on Beatrice. Miss Lawson, he asked, approaching quickly. Benjamin Daniels, your uncle's attorney. We had almost given up hope. Mr. Daniels, Beatrice acknowledged with a nod. I understand my uncle has been searching for me. Indeed he has, my dear. He will be overjoyed to learn of your survival. Mr. Daniels looked her up and down, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. You must be exhausted from your journey. I've arranged a room for you upstairs, with a bath to be prepared immediately. And I've taken the liberty of having some appropriate attire delivered. Beatrice glanced down at her buckskin pants and flannel shirt, clothing Quinn had adapted from his own wardrobe for her use during the winter. That's very thoughtful, Mr. Daniels. After you've rested and refreshed yourself, perhaps we could discuss your situation over dinner, the attorney suggested. I have much to tell you regarding your uncle's provisions for your welfare. Beatrice agreed, and soon found herself soaking in the first real bath she'd had since the attack. The hot water soothed her travel-weary muscles, and the soap scented with lavender reminded her of her mother's favorite perfume. The memory brought both comfort and sorrow. The clothing Mr. Daniels had provided was of excellent quality, a green day dress with modest bustle, appropriate undergarments, and even a pair of soft leather boots in approximately her size. Beatrice dressed carefully, feeling like she was donning a costume for a play rather than returning to her normal attire. When she joined Mr. Daniels for dinner in the hotel's dining room, his approving nod confirmed that she looked more like the proper young lady her parents had raised and less like a wilderness survivor. Much better, he said, rising to hold her chair. You look quite well, considering all you've been through. Mr. Everett took excellent care of me, Beatrice replied, deliberately emphasizing Quinn's role in her survival. Ah, yes, the mountain man who found you. Mr. Daniels signaled for the waiter. The army will ensure he receives the reward your uncle offered. Quinn didn't mention a reward when I left, Beatrice said, frowning. I'm not sure he even knows about it. No matter. The lieutenant will see to it. Mr. Daniels unfolded his napkin with practiced precision. Now to business. Your uncle was deeply distressed to learn of his brother's fate. As your nearest living relative, he feels responsible for your welfare. That's very kind of him, Beatrice said carefully. He has instructed me to provide you with funds for immediate needs and to arrange your passage back to Cincinnati as soon as you feel strong enough to travel. The attorney produced an envelope from his jacket. This should cover any expenses while you're in Reno. Beatrice accepted the envelope without opening it. Please convey my thanks to Uncle Robert. However, I should inform you that I do not intend to return to Cincinnati. Mr. Daniels paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. I beg your pardon. My plans are to remain in Nevada territory, Beatrice stated firmly. I appreciate my uncle's concern, but I've made arrangements for my future here. The attorney set his fork down, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. Miss Lawson, you've endured a terrible ordeal. It's natural to feel a certain attachment to the person who rescued you, but such feelings, born of trauma and gratitude, often fade when normal circumstances resume. Beatrice felt her temper rising but maintained her composure. Mr. Daniels, I assure you I am of sound mind. My decision is not based solely on gratitude, nor is it impulsive. Nevertheless, your uncle would be most distressed if I allowed you to remain alone in this frontier town without proper protection or prospects. Mr. Daniels leaned forward. He has, in fact, made arrangements with the son of his business partner, a most eligible young man named Frederick Palmer, who has expressed interest in meeting you upon your return. Beatrice couldn't help but laugh, though she quickly covered it with a cough. Mr. Daniels, while I appreciate my uncle's concern for my future, I must inform you that I am already spoken for. Spoken for? The attorney's eyebrows rose to his hairline. You mean to say this? This trapper has made you an offer. Mr. Everett is a rancher, not a trapper, Beatrice corrected coldly. And yes, we have an understanding. Mr. Daniels sat back, clearly disconcerted by this development. Miss Lawson, I urge you to consider carefully before making any binding decisions. Your uncle can provide you with security, comfort, and position in Cincinnati society. What can this Everett fellow offer beyond a life of hardship in the wilderness? Happiness, Beatrice answered simply. And after coming so close to death, Mr. Daniels, I've learned that happiness is worth more than security or position. The attorney studied her for a long moment, then sighed. I see you have your father's stubborn streak. Robert always said Henry would argue with the wind. A reluctant smile crossed his face. Your uncle instructed me to respect your wishes, whatever they might be, though he hoped you would choose to return east. Relief washed through Beatrice. Thank you for understanding. I didn't say I understood, Mr. Daniels clarified. But it's not my place to force you onto a train against your will. The funds in that envelope are yours regardless of your decision. The remainder of the dinner passed in more cordial conversation, with Mr. Daniels sharing news of Cincinnati and Beatrice, carefully editing her account of the months spent in Quinn's cabin. The following day, Beatrice set about acquiring the supplies she would need for her return to Quinn's ranch. The money her uncle had provided was generous, allowing her to purchase not only necessities, but also several items that would make their life together more comfortable: cooking utensils, fabric for curtains and bedding, and seeds for her planned garden. In a small jewelry shop near the hotel, she found herself lingering over a display of men's rings. A simple gold band caught her eye, and on impulse, she purchased it, tucking it safely into her reticule. As she moved about town, Beatrice became aware of curious glances and whispered conversations following in her wake. Word of her survival had apparently spread, and the story of the lone woman rescued after an Indian attack had captured the town's imagination. On her third day in Reno, as Beatrice was arranging for her purchases to be packed for transport, a well-dressed woman approached her outside the general store. "Miss Lawson, I'm Margaret Wheeler, editor of the Reno Gazette." The woman extended her hand. "I wonder if I might have a word with you about your extraordinary experience." Beatrice hesitated, unsure how to respond to this unexpected approach. "I'm not certain there's much to tell that would interest your readers, Mrs. Wheeler." "On the contrary," the editor replied with enthusiasm. "Yours is a story of survival against impossible odds, exactly the kind of tale that inspires hope in our readers, and the human interest of a young woman rescued by a solitary rancher." She raised an eyebrow suggestively. "I'm sorry, but I value my privacy," Beatrice said firmly. "And Mr. Everett values his even more so." Mrs. Wheeler looked disappointed but nodded in understanding. "Of course, though should you change your mind, my office is just down the street." She handed Beatrice a card. "We pay for exclusive accounts." Beatrice pocketed the card with a polite smile, but had no intention of sharing her and Quinn's story with the newspaper. Their experience felt too personal, too sacred to be transformed into entertainment for strangers. By the end of her first week in Reno, Beatrice had concluded all her business and was eager to return to Quinn. She approached Lieutenant Foster, who was still stationed in town, to inquire about an escort back to Quinn's ranch. "I can arrange for 2 of my men to accompany you, Miss Lawson," the lieutenant offered, "though I must warn you that conditions may not be ideal. The spring thaw has turned much of the trail to mud." "I've faced worse," Beatrice assured him. The lieutenant studied her with newfound respect. "So you have. Very well, I'll have my men ready at dawn tomorrow." That evening, as Beatrice packed her new possessions for the journey, a knock came at her hotel room door. She opened it to find Mr. Daniels, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "Miss Lawson, I've just received a telegram from your uncle," he said, holding out a folded paper. "He wished you to see it immediately." Beatrice accepted the telegram with a sense of foreboding. Had Uncle Robert changed his mind about respecting her wishes? The message was brief, but clear. "Learned of Everett. Stop military records indicate honorable service and Medal of Valor. Stop approve your choice if certain. Stop wedding gift to follow. Stop Uncle Robert." Relief and amusement mingled as Beatrice handed the telegram back to Mr. Daniels. "It seems my uncle has been making inquiries about Mr. Everett." "So it would appear," the attorney agreed with a slight smile. "Your Uncle Robert is nothing if not thorough. Please tell him I appreciate his concern and his blessing," Beatrice said, "and that I am quite certain of my choice." Mr. Daniels nodded. "I shall. He also instructed me to provide you with this as an early wedding present." He produced a small leather pouch from his pocket. Inside, Beatrice found a gold locket containing miniature portraits of her parents, painted before their journey west. "He thought you might want something to remember them by," Mr. Daniels explained gently. "Your mother left it with him for safekeeping before the journey." Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes as she gazed at the familiar faces, her father's strong jawline and kind eyes, her mother's gentle smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means more than I can say." Mr. Daniels cleared his throat, clearly moved by her emotion. "I shall inform your uncle of your departure tomorrow. He asks only that you write occasionally to assure him of your welfare." "Of course," Beatrice agreed, closing the locket and placing it around her neck. "I would have done so anyway." The journey back to Quinn's ranch took 4 days, delayed by muddy trails and swollen streams. With each mile, Beatrice's anticipation grew. She had been gone just over 10 days, but it felt like months since she had seen Quinn's face. When they finally crested the ridge overlooking the cabin, Beatrice's heart leaped at the sight below. Quinn was outside, splitting wood. Even from a distance, she could see that he had been busy in her absence. The cabin had a new addition extending from the back, and the beginnings of a fence enclosed what would become her garden. As they approached, Quinn looked up, dropping his axe immediately when he recognized her. He strode toward them, his face breaking into a rare, full smile that transformed his features. Beatrice didn't wait for the soldiers to help her dismount. She slid from her horse and ran the last few yards into Quinn's waiting arms. He caught her and swung her around, holding her as if he'd never let go. "You came back," he murmured against her hair. "Of course I did," Beatrice replied, pulling back to look at his face. "I promised." The soldiers, tactfully allowing them their privacy, began unloading Beatrice's purchases. Quinn noticed the substantial pile of supplies with raised eyebrows. "Looks like you've been busy in town," he observed. "My uncle was generous," Beatrice explained, "and I had a lot of planning to do for our future." Quinn's eyes softened at her words. "Speaking of future plans," he said, taking her hand, "I have something to show you." He led her to the cabin, where the new addition was nearly complete. Inside, he had created a cozy bedroom with a real bed frame he must have purchased or traded for during her absence. But it was the item on the small table by the window that captured Beatrice's attention, a simple gold ring with a small pearl set into the band. "I rode into Carson City while you were gone," Quinn explained, suddenly looking nervous. "Wasn't sure what was proper, but the jeweler said pearls are for brides." Beatrice turned to him with shining eyes. "It's beautiful." Quinn took a deep breath and, to her surprise, lowered himself to one knee before her. "Beatrice Lawson, I'm not a man of many words, and I don't have much to offer beyond this land and my heart. But if you'll have me, I promise to spend every day trying to deserve you." Tears blurred Beatrice's vision as she nodded. "Yes, Quinn. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and kissed her, pouring months of longing and love into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, Beatrice remembered her own purchase. "I have something for you as well," she said, retrieving the gold band from her bag. "I wasn't sure of the size." Quinn looked stunned as she placed the ring in his palm. "You bought this in Reno." "I wanted to be prepared," Beatrice admitted with a smile. "I had a feeling you might ask properly when I returned." Quinn tried the ring on. It was slightly loose but would serve. "Seems we had the same idea," he said, his voice rough with emotion. They were married 2 weeks later by a traveling preacher who stopped at their ranch on his circuit. The ceremony was simple, witnessed only by a neighboring family Quinn had befriended over the years. Beatrice wore her green dress from Reno, with wildflowers in her hair, and Quinn had somehow procured a new shirt for the occasion. As spring blossomed into summer, they settled into their life together. Beatrice's garden thrived under her care, providing fresh vegetables to supplement their meals. Quinn expanded his cattle herd and built a proper chicken coop, which soon housed a dozen hens producing more eggs than they could eat. Word of their story eventually spread through the territory, despite their desire for privacy. Occasionally, travelers would go out of their way to pass by the Everett ranch, hoping to glimpse the couple whose love story had become something of a local legend. In the fall of 1869, exactly 1 year after the attack that had nearly claimed Beatrice's life, she shared news that brought Quinn to tears of joy. They were expecting a child in the spring. Their son, Henry Robert Everett, was born on a mild April morning in 1870, with a neighboring woman serving as midwife. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, evident from his first lusty cries. As Beatrice watched Quinn holding their infant son, his weathered face soft with wonder, she thought of the strange path that had led her to this moment. The tragedy that had taken her family had also, against all odds, given her a new one. The arrow that had nearly ended her life had instead redirected it toward a happiness she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking?" Quinn asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," Beatrice replied, reaching out to take his hand. "And that I wouldn't change a single step of the journey that brought me here." Quinn squeezed her fingers, his eyes reflecting the depth of his understanding and love. "Nor would I, my heart, nor would I." In the years that followed, the Everett ranch prospered and grew. Beatrice gave birth to twin daughters, Sarah and Margaret, 2 years after Henry's arrival. Quinn built a larger home to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original cabin standing as a reminder of their beginning. Beatrice's uncle visited once, making the long journey west to meet the family his niece had chosen over Cincinnati society. He left with a newfound respect for Quinn and the life they had built together, becoming a regular correspondent and occasionally sending books and educational materials for the children. The attacks that had once plagued the territory gradually diminished as treaties were negotiated and respected by both sides. Though Beatrice never forgot the violence that had marked her introduction to Nevada, she came to understand the desperate circumstances that had driven some to such acts, and she raised her children to respect all peoples and their ways. Quinn, too, found healing from his war experiences through the family they created together. The nightmares that had once haunted him faded, replaced by dreams of future harvests and his children's growth. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat together on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in gold and crimson, Quinn turned to Beatrice with the same intense gaze that had captured her heart years before. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if I hadn't been tracking that mountain lion that day?" he asked quietly. Beatrice shook her head, touching the scar on her shoulder through her dress. "No. Some things are meant to be, Quinn. I believe we would have found each other somehow, some way." "A fatalist," Quinn teased, though his eyes remained serious. "After all these years, you still surprise me." "Good," Beatrice replied with a smile. "I plan to keep surprising you for at least 50 more. As the last light faded from the sky, Quinn pulled her close, his arms as strong and sure as they had been on the day he'd found her, broken and bleeding in the dust. In the distance, their children's laughter drifted from the house, a sound that never failed to fill Beatrice's heart with gratitude. From tragedy had come joy. From near death, the fullest life she could imagine. And from a chance encounter in the wilderness, a love story that would be told in their family for generations to come.